The hillside is silent. Then the axes start. Not weapons. Tools. Roman soldiers move through a Greek olive grove, cutting down trees that are already older than the war itself. Each trunk falls slowly. Each one takes a century to replace. This is not a battle for land. It is a battle for something smaller and far more valuable. A fruit the size of a thumbnail. An oil pressed from it that could light a lamp, heal a wound, crown a king, or starve an enemy simply by disappearing. This is not only the story of olive oil. It is the story of how one tree became so powerful that empires went to war to control it. Priests declared it sacred, and kings could not be crowned without it touching their skin. For 6,000 years, this single substance shaped how people ate, prayed, fought, and ruled. Long before oil meant petroleum, oil meant survival. And whoever controlled it held something more durable than any army. This is the story of that oil, and it begins with a tree nobody wanted. Wild olive was bitter, small, barely edible. For centuries it grew untouched on the rocky hills of the eastern Mediterranean, ignored by early farmers who preferred grain and grapes. Then, sometime around 4000 BCE, someone changed that. Historians cannot name this person. No record survives. But somewhere in the Levant or on the island of Crete, someone crushed the bitter fruit, separated the liquid, and discovered a golden oil that did not spoil, burned cleanly, and preserved food for months. It seemed like a small discovery. It was not. Consider what it replaced. Before this, light after sunset came from burning wood or animal fat, both smoky, both short-lived. Food preservation meant salt, smoke, or simple luck. A liquid that could do both cleanly changed the rhythm of daily life itself. A household with oil could see after dark. A household with oil could eat through winter. That is not a small discovery. That is a revolution measured in lamplight. Stone presses appear across Crete and the Levant soon after, some carved directly into bedrock. Families stood barefoot on crushed fruit for hours, extracting oil through nothing but pressure and patience. The work was exhausting. The reward changed the ancient world. By 3000 BCE, the olive tree had been transformed, domesticated, grafted, cultivated with the same discipline as wheat. And on Crete, something unprecedented began to rise from the landscape. The palace of Knossos. Its walls were painted with leaping bulls and diving dolphins. Its corridors stretched for hundreds of meters. And deep inside it, archaeologists found rooms lined with massive clay jars, some large enough to hold a grown man standing upright. Many had once held oil. This was not simple storage. Clay tablets recovered from the site, written in a script called Linear A, still only partly understood. Record oil shipments, oil taxes, oil wages. The palace was not just a home for a king. It was an administrative machine, and oil was its fuel. Walk further into the complex, and you find something else. Small clay vessels shaped like animals and human figures, many of them designed specifically for pouring oil during religious ceremonies. Archaeologists have found these ritual containers called rita across Minoan sites, evidence that oil moved between two worlds at once: the practical world of taxation and trade, and the sacred world of ritual and offering. Long before any temple in Jerusalem or Rome existed, Crete had already decided this substance belonged to the gods as much as to the treasury. Here is the idea. This entire story will keep proving. Whoever controlled the oil controlled the food supply, the trade routes, the loyalty of the people who depended on both. Consider the scale of what archaeologists found in a single storage room at Knossos. Some of the pithoi jars there could each hold well over 1,000 liters. Multiply that across dozens of jars in dozens of rooms, and the palace was not simply wealthy. It was functioning as a bank, with oil instead of coins as the deposit. Minoan ships carried that oil across the Aegean, trading it for copper, tin, and luxury goods from Egypt. Egyptian tomb paintings from this same era depict Aegean traders bringing oil vessels as gifts to pharaohs, a detail that lets historians place Crete's oil economy directly inside the wider Bronze Age world, alongside Egypt and the Near East. For centuries, the system held. Then the sky went dark. Around 1600 BCE, a volcanic island 70 miles north of Crete tore itself apart. Thera, modern Santorini, erupted with a force still studied by volcanologists today. Ash fell for days. Tsunamis struck Cretan harbors. Historians still debate exactly how much this catastrophe weakened Minoan civilization. What is certain is this. Within a few generations, Minoan power faded, and on the Greek mainland, a new civilization rose to take its place. The Mycenaeans inherited the olive economy, but they militarized it. Their clay tablets, written in an early form of Greek called Linear B, describe oil as more than food. They record perfumed oil manufactured in dedicated workshops, blended with herbs, shipped to the courts of Egypt and the Hittite Empire as luxury diplomacy. A Mycenaean scribe leans over a wet clay tablet, pressing symbols into it with a reed stylus before it dries. He is not recording poetry. He is counting jars. Oil for the palace kitchen. Oil for the perfumers. Oil owed by one village, oil delivered by another. Olive oil, in other words, helped drive some of the earliest palace bureaucracies. Someone had to track it. The palaces eventually burned. Around 1200 BCE, across the eastern Mediterranean, one Bronze Age center after another collapsed within a few generations. Historians call it the Late Bronze Age collapse, and they still argue over exactly why. Drought, invasion, internal revolt, possibly all three at once, but the economy that ran on oil did not disappear. It simply moved south, to a city that would turn a tree into a national identity. Athens, 5th century BCE. According to myth, the gods Athena and Poseidon once competed for patronage of the city. Poseidon struck the earth and produced a spring of seawater. Athena planted an olive tree. The Athenians chose the tree. They named their city after her. This was never just a myth. It revealed what the civilization believed made it strong. Not the sea, not conquest. Cultivation. Sacred olive trees called Morii grew near the Acropolis. Destroying one was a capital crime. Winners of the Panathenaic Games received jars filled with oil pressed from those very trees, a prize more prestigious than gold. Olympic champions wore olive wreaths, not because the leaves were beautiful, but because the tree symbolized peace and endurance. Here is a fact worth remembering. Some olive trees take 15 years before producing their first harvest. Planting one was not a purchase. It was a promise to a future the planter might never live to see. The lawmaker Solon understood this. Historians credit him with protecting olive cultivation through early legal reform, recognizing that a tree requiring 15 patient years needed different laws than a wheat field replanted every season. An identity needs ships to survive. Athenian triremes did not carry only soldiers. Their holds carried amphorae, thousands of them, sealed with wax, bound for ports across the Mediterranean. Every one of those jars was a small fortune. A cracked seal or a spoiled cargo could ruin the merchant who shipped it, since his entire livelihood rested on a thin layer of wax over pressed olives. Silver from the mines of Laurion financed the core of the Athenian fleet, but olive oil exports added a steady second stream of wealth, one that helped the city sustain that fleet year after year. Fine painted vessels called lekythoi many of them designed specifically to hold oil, have been found by archaeologists in graves across Attica, often placed beside the dead as funerary offerings, a small physical reminder of how deeply this substance was woven into Athenian life from birth to burial. It seemed permanent. It was not. The Peloponnesian War arrived in 431 BCE. Spartan forces marched into Attica and did something calculated. They did not simply burn wheat fields, which could be replanted within a year. They cut down olive trees, because Sparta understood the same lesson Athens had built its identity around. Destroy the groves, and you destroy decades of wealth in a single afternoon. Somewhere in Attica, a farmer returns to his land after the fighting has moved on. Where a grove once stood, only blackened stumps remain. He cannot simply replant and wait a season. He must wait 15 years for a single tree to bear fruit again. He may not live to taste it. Multiply that farmer by thousands across the entire region of Attica, and you understand why Athens survived the war. But its economy did not recover for generations. The empire changed. The lesson did not. Centuries later, a new power on the Italian peninsula would learn that lesson too, and apply it on a scale the ancient world had never seen. Rome did not invent the olive economy. Rome industrialized it. As Roman legions conquered Carthage, Greece, Egypt, and Hispania, the Republic inherited olive-growing regions across 3 continents. Roman writers like Cato the Elder produced detailed manuals on cultivation, treating oil production as a science rather than a craft. Roman engineers refined the press itself. The new lever and screw design extracted oil faster and more efficiently than anything before it. Enormous estates called latifundia worked largely by enslaved labor, dedicated entire regions of Hispania and North Africa to a single purpose: olive monoculture, feeding one city. Walk through the buried streets of Pompeii today, frozen in the moment Vesuvius erupted in 79 CE, and you can still see it, stone presses standing exactly where they stood on that final morning. Storage jars still sealed with the residue of oil that was never sold. An entire town's economy, preserved mid-motion by volcanic ash, gives historians a rare, unfiltered snapshot of how thoroughly this industry structured everyday Roman commerce. Rome. The capital consumed staggering amounts of oil. Historians estimate tens of millions of liters every year. It lit lamps in every home. It fueled the public baths. It anointed athletes, soldiers, and the dead. Physicians like Galen prescribed it in ointments for wounds and skin disease. A legionary's marching pack, somewhere along the northern frontier, carries grain, salted meat, and a small flask of oil. It is not a luxury. It is his ration. Oil provides calories his body needs for a day's march, and it doubles as basic first aid for blistered feet and chafed skin. An army that ran on bread also ran on oil, quietly, in every soldier's pack. Here is a fact that still surprises people today. Outside Rome, along the Tiber River, a hill rises that is not made of stone. It is made of jars. Monte Testaccio. An estimated 53 million broken amphorae, smashed and stacked over roughly 250 years, coated in lime to prevent the smell of old oil from lingering. Each fragment once carried oil from Hispania to Rome. Because leftover residue would spoil future cargo, the empty jars were destroyed rather than reused. It is a mountain built from receipts, a physical record of appetite on a scale no civilization had produced before. Stamps still visible on the fragments record the names of producers, shippers, even government inspectors who verified weight and quality. Rome did not simply import oil. Rome regulated it, taxed it, distributed portions of it free to citizens through the annona, alongside grain, to keep the population fed and politically calm. Bread and circuses is the phrase historians remember. Some argue it should include oil as well. A population with guaranteed food, light, and hygiene revolts less often. At the height of the empire, bathers at the public baths do not use soap as we know it. Instead, attendants rub them with oil, then scrape it away with a curved bronze tool called a strigil, carrying dirt and sweat away with it. This happens every single day in bathhouses across hundreds of Roman cities from Britain to Syria, and it depends entirely on a steady, uninterrupted supply of oil. Ask yourself what happens to a city of 1 million people if that supply ever stops. For centuries, the system appeared unbreakable. Then, in the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, the cracks began. Piracy increased. Provincial administration weakened. Shipping lanes that had carried oil safely for centuries became unreliable. The great estates of Hispania and North Africa, once integrated into a single imperial economy, found themselves cut off as Roman authority in the West collapsed. In 476 CE, a Germanic general named Odoacer deposed the last Roman emperor in Italy. No single dramatic event announced the end of the oil trade that day. It simply faded, region by region, decade by decade. In the first years afterward, in places like Britain and northern Gaul, imported olive oil grew rare, then rarer. Then it vanished from ordinary households within a generation or two. Archaeologists can see this moment in the ground itself. Amphora fragments, once common in Roman-era soil layers across these regions, become dramatically scarcer after the 5th century. Communities that had cooked with, bathed in, and burned Mediterranean oil for hundreds of years returned to animal fat and butter instead, a quiet detail. But historians see in it something larger, the physical fading of Roman civilization itself, one abandoned lamp at a time. Decades after the legions withdraw from Britain in 410 CE, a widow reaches for the small clay lamp her mother once filled with imported oil. There is none left to buy. She fills it with rendered animal fat instead. It burns dimmer. It smells worse. But it burns. Multiply her by thousands of households across a province that had been Roman for 4 centuries, and you can see an empire ending, not in a single battle, but in small, quiet substitutions like this one, repeated in home after home. The empire disappeared. The demand for what had sustained it did not, because in the East, an empire survived, and a new religious civilization was about to give this oil a meaning more powerful than any emperor ever had. The Byzantine Empire, the surviving eastern half of Rome, kept Mediterranean oil production and trade largely intact for another 1,000 years. But it was Christianity, spreading through both the Byzantine and former Western Roman world, that transformed oil from commodity into sacrament. Chrism, a consecrated oil blended with balsam, used to anoint the newly baptized, used to consecrate priests, used to bless the dying in a rite still practiced today. When medieval kings were crowned, oil marked their transformation into sacred rulers, not the crown alone. English monarchs have been anointed with holy oil for over 1,000 years. King Charles III was anointed this same way in 2023. Judaism had already established this weight centuries earlier. The Hebrew Bible describes prophets anointing kings with olive oil. The 7-branched menorah, one of Judaism's oldest symbols, was traditionally fueled by pure olive oil in the ancient temple in Jerusalem. According to later Jewish tradition, when the Second Temple was rededicated after its desecration in the 2nd century BCE, Only a single small jar of ritually pure oil could be found, enough by rights for just one night. The Quran describes the olive as a blessed tree, its oil so pure it seems to glow before flame even touches it. Three major world religions, different centuries, different continents, the same instinct. This oil was never ordinary. In Byzantine churches, a bronze lamp hanging before an icon burns continuously, day and night, fed only by olive oil, as an act of devotion rather than simple lighting. Across the Byzantine world, and later across Orthodox Christianity more broadly, this practice continued for centuries, an unbroken thread of small flames connecting ordinary worshippers to something ancient and sacred. Meanwhile, in the same centuries, a very different scene was unfolding 1,000 miles south. In Fustat, near modern Cairo, medieval merchants left behind an extraordinary archive, thousands of documents now known as the Cairo Geniza. Among letters, contracts, and shipping records, historians have found detailed accounts of the Mediterranean oil trade, showing Jewish, Muslim, and Christian merchants trading the same commodity across religious and political boundaries that otherwise divided them completely. Oil, it turns out, did not care which god a merchant prayed to. As Islamic civilization expanded across North Africa and into Iberia in the 8th century, it carried advanced agricultural science with it. In Al-Andalus, engineers refined irrigation and cultivation techniques inherited from Rome and Byzantium, then improved them further. Arabic texts from this era describe grafting methods and pest management more advanced than anything Roman manuals had recorded centuries earlier. Even language carries the memory of this exchange. Words for oil across multiple European languages trace back through Semitic roots, filtered through Greek and Latin, evidence of how deeply this substance moved through Mediterranean civilization long before any of these empires existed. In 10th century Cordoba, one of the largest and most learned cities in the world at the time, a scholar copies an agricultural treatise by candlelight. The library he works in holds hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, drawing knowledge from Greek, Persian, and Arabic sources alike. Among the practical sciences preserved and advanced there is the cultivation of the olive, refined by generations of Andalusian farmers into something close to an art form. When Christian kingdoms eventually retook the peninsula, they inherited groves, irrigation channels, and centuries of accumulated expertise along with the land itself. After the Reconquista concluded in 1492, Spain inherited this deep agricultural knowledge. It would eventually become the largest olive oil producer on Earth, a position it still holds today. Further east, the Ottoman Empire, rising in the 14th century and eventually controlling much of the eastern Mediterranean, absorbed the same olive-growing regions that Byzantium and Rome had once fought over. Ottoman administrators taxed oil production much as Roman officials once had, recognizing, across a gap of more than 1,000 years, the same economic truth. Control the oil, and you control the province. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Mediterranean, monasteries across Christian Europe had quietly become some of the most sophisticated agricultural producers on the continent. Monks in Italy, France, and Spain maintained detailed records of olive cultivation across centuries, preserving and refining techniques through periods of political chaos that might otherwise have erased them. When kingdoms rose and fell around their walls, monastery groves often continued producing, harvest after harvest, protected as much by their spiritual authority as by any wall or army. Faith, in this case, functioned as an unlikely form of agricultural insurance. But before Spain's global dominance arrived, one more story deserves telling. Not of empires, of ordinary people. Somewhere in medieval Tuscany, a farmer plants a grove of young trees. He will not live to see them reach full maturity. Some varieties take 15, 20 years. He is not planting food for himself. He is planting food for his grandchildren. Olive trees can live for centuries. Some documented specimens in the Mediterranean are estimated to be over 1,000 years old, still bearing fruit today. This slow, patient relationship with the land shaped rural Mediterranean life in ways faster crops never could. Groves became family inheritances, boundary markers, symbols of continuity through war, famine, and changing rulers. When the Black Death swept across Europe in the 14th century, killing roughly a third of the population in many regions, something unusual happened in the countryside. Olive groves across Italy, Greece, and Spain often sat untended for years, sometimes decades. The trees did not care. They simply waited. And when survivors eventually returned, the harvest was still there. Even amid catastrophe, whoever could still produce this oil held something of lasting value. Merchant families in medieval Genoa and Venice understood this value perfectly. Italian trading fleets carried Mediterranean oil northward into growing European markets, alongside spices and silk, and some of the same merchant dynasties that grew wealthy on this trade later helped finance the banking systems that would define early modern Europe. A humble jar of pressed olives, in other words, helped seed the beginnings of European capital itself. For centuries afterward, production stayed almost unchanged. Stone presses, human labor, Mediterranean sun. Then the 19th century arrived, and the machines came with it. Hydraulic presses, patented in the early 1800s, replaced lever systems that had barely changed since Roman times. Steam power, then electric motors, mechanized crushing. By the 20th century, centrifugal separation replaced the ancient method of simply letting oil rise above water. The chemistry never changed. The labor did. Work once done by hundreds of hands was now completed by machines in minutes, and old stone wheels across the Mediterranean fell silent within a single generation, replaced by diesel and, later, electric presses. This shift coincided with waves of Mediterranean immigration. Italians, Greeks, and Spaniards carried both their oil and their traditions across the Atlantic and beyond. Spanish missionaries had already planted olive trees in California 2 centuries earlier, and by the 20th century, groves stretched across parts of the American West, Australia, South Africa, and South America. A substance almost unknown outside the Mediterranean basin slowly became a global product, sold in supermarkets thousands of miles from the nearest ancient grove. The Second World War tested the old system one more time. Across occupied Greece and Italy in the 1940s, oil, like grain, became a target of requisition and rationing. Families hid jars underground or behind false walls, protecting what they could from occupying forces, just as Mediterranean communities had protected their harvests from raiders for thousands of years before them. Nothing about that instinct was new. Only the uniforms were. After the war, a new kind of authority arrived to manage this ancient trade. In 1959, the International Olive Council was established to regulate quality standards and trade practices across producing nations, an institution that, in its own modest way, echoes the Roman inspectors who once stamped amphorae at Monte Testaccio 2,000 years earlier. And yet the ancient patterns never fully disappeared. Here is a fact that might surprise you. Olive oil remains one of the most counterfeited food products in the world. Fraudulent labeling and adulteration scandals have recurred across Europe for over a century. The same substance so valuable that Roman inspectors once stamped every jar to verify authenticity is still valuable enough today to attract sophisticated fraud 2,000 years later. In 1981, a wave of contaminated cooking oil in Spain caused hundreds of deaths, though investigators ultimately traced it to industrial rapeseed oil, mislabeled as olive oil, not genuine olive oil itself. The panic it caused nationwide reveals something deeper: how completely olive oil had become tied to Spanish identity and trust. More recently, criminal investigations across Italy and Spain have uncovered organized networks blending cheap seed oils with small amounts of genuine olive oil, then selling the mixture at premium prices under falsified labels. Investigators have described some of these operations as being run with the same organizational sophistication as other forms of trafficking. It is a strange, almost fitting irony. A substance once guarded by sacred law and imperial inspectors is now guarded by food fraud detectives using laboratory chromatography instead of clay seals. The tools of detection have grown far more advanced. The motive to cheat has not changed at all. Today, a different threat is spreading across the same hillsides that fed Minoan palaces and Roman legions: rising temperatures, prolonged droughts. Scientists studying the Mediterranean basin report olive harvests already falling sharply in Spain, Italy, and Greece in recent years. A system of cultivation older than written history is now facing a challenge no army, plague, or empire ever managed to end completely. A farmer today stands in the same kind of grove a Roman estate manager might have walked through 2,000 years ago. He checks a soil moisture app on his phone instead of reading the sky. But he is asking the same question every olive farmer before him has asked: will there be enough rain this year to save the harvest? Some things change. That question has not. So what does one small, oily fruit reveal across 6,000 years? Across Minoan palaces, Athenian democracy, Roman legions, Byzantine emperors, medieval popes, and modern supermarket shelves, it reveals that power was never only about armies or gold. It was about the quiet, patient control of what people needed to eat, to heal, to worship, and to see in the dark. Whoever held the oil held influence that outlasted any single ruler, because the trees themselves outlived every empire built around them. The palace at Knossos crumbled into ruins centuries ago. Somewhere in Andalusia, an olive tree planted before the fall of Rome is almost certainly still standing today, indifferent to every empire that once depended on it. Some Mediterranean trees are estimated to be hundreds of years old, a rare few over 1,000, their trunks hollow and twisted by centuries of wind and drought. Every autumn, they still produce fruit. Outside Rome, the mountain of broken jars is still there too. Wildflowers now grow across 53 million shattered pieces of history, and nobody stamps new amphorae there anymore. Nobody needs to. The trees remember what the empires forgot. Some things are worth more than gold precisely because they cannot be conquered, only cultivated. One patient season at a time,